Lisbeth Newman, a database administrator, considered herself a health nut. At 49, she watched her nutrition, exercised regularly, and stayed spiritually active. She was also experienced with fasting and meditation, and she'd taken part in sweat lodge ceremonies before. Lisbeth was also strong-willed. That was something her 3 children would tell the press after her death in 2009. Mom had been strong-willed and intelligent, which might have contributed to her grit and her stick-to-itiveness when she chose to stay in the sweat lodge. That killed her. When the screaming started, the people began crawling on the ground to escape the burning air. Lisbeth Newman didn't budge. The guru who was running the event, James Ray, had recently shamed her publicly for breaking a 2-day desert fast and sharing snacks and wine. Lisbeth was strong, so when a real estate agent named Dennis ripped the tent flap open, vomiting and shouting, "My heart, I don't want to die," Lisbeth stayed in the lodge, curled up on the floor. Calling it a lodge might be too generous, by the way. In the news pictures, the sweat lodge looked more like a patched dome of sticks and canvas in the Arizona desert, just big enough to cook 55 people, half of whom would need to be life-flighted out. The sweat lodge event was supposed to be a high point of a $10,000 spiritual retreat, a hippy-dippy empowerment event run by motivational speaker James Arthur. When James Arthur Ray heard the screams of the people who inhaled the burning steam, he encouraged them to stay, telling them, "You're stronger than this. You can get over this. Mind over matter." When the screams became too much, even for James Ray to tolerate, he asked his followers for silence during the last rounds of steam, like they were playing the quiet game while being boiled alive. These last few rounds came after an already 2.5-hour steam event. By now, several followers had lost consciousness entirely. Their skin had turned bright red from the heat, or purple from those whose organs had begun to shut down. They were covered in dirt almost completely. Lisbeth was coated in damp desert soil. She and the man she was lying next to had worked out a tapping system to check on each other, but Lisbeth had stopped tapping somewhere between the 5th and 6th rounds. By the time James Ray asked for silence, she was already limp, slumped against his shins. James Ray, who hadn't fasted or abstained from hydration during the retreat, like Lisbeth, dumped more water on the coals. He continued dumping water for another 2 rounds, generating more and more steam. He had prepared his followers for the event by shaving their heads and making them watch The Last Samurai. In the tent, he misquoted Bushido and Native American proverbs. Then, when he finally allowed the flaps to be opened, half the 50-plus spirit warriors had to be dragged out. They were washed off with the hose, and the volunteers found that some were turning purple or foaming at the mouth. That's when someone thought to ask, "Has anyone seen Lisbeth?" Nobody had, because while the survivors and dying were outside being washed, Lisbeth was still inside on the ground. The followers who were still able to stand began CPR. They would keep performing CPR for another 45 minutes while James Ray slipped out the back and quietly drove away from the retreat. During the steaming, when Lisbeth had first gone unconscious, someone asked James Ray if they could check on her to see if she was all right. James' response, quote, "Liz has done this before. She knows what she's doing." Because Lisbeth Newman was strong-willed right up until the end. You're listening to The Re-Engineered You. This is a podcast about self-empowerment and all the myths, lies, and misconceptions we tell ourselves. Then we use science and history to bust those myths and re-engineer a better you. I'm your host, Todd Lemense, the extrovert.
And I'm the writer, researcher, and introvert, Joe Anthony, whose job it is to dig through the outer layer of no-daw on the internet and get to the facts.
In the 1990s, the self-help industry hit its confident, self-empowered stride. Tony Robbins was on TV, throwing fists in the air, trying to unlock your unlimited power. And Spencer Johnson wanted to give you a better cheese to chase. Then, in the early 2000s, our appetite for self-help gurus changed. We needed them to be available online, personally, just a text message away. For a small fortune, they or their assistant would access our unlimited power over the phone, like a sex hotline for CEOs. Except the gratification they got would be spiritual and self-actualizing instead of sexual. This is still a service offered by most gurus we talk about today, if you want to call them up. Fast forward 2 decades to 2021. Now, when gurus are now referred to as influencers, they live plush, disconnected lives where they rise to the top of the Instagram or Facebook pyramid as long as they seem relatable. For as long as they can connect to their followers and their jet and white wine lifestyles look obtainable. Then, as these influencer gurus became insulated by wealth, followers turn their backs on the gurus who become unrelatable. Case in point, take Rachel Hollis, who never hid the fact that she came from money, married a Disney executive, and had maids. Nevertheless, when she casually mentioned during a live stream that she has a domestic servant who, quote, cleans the toilets, her HOCO value plummeted, and her $100,000 price tag for a speaking event was slashed. But somewhere between the area of unlimited 90s power and the influencer boom, we got spirit warriors. We got James Arthur Ray boiling people in the Sedona Desert. On today's episode of The Re-Engineer You, we want to bust 3 simple myths about the Sweat Lodge manslaughter case, which left 3 educated, reasonable people dead and dozens hospitalized. Myths about how James Ray's followers were all cultists, and they somehow deserve what happened. Myths like, Myth 1. You and I are clever. Think for ourselves, people, right? Not crabs. We would have left the tent long before we were ever boiled alive. Myth 2. Self-help is one thing, but the Steam Lodge event was just a hair shy of whipping their own backs like zealots. You and I would have never fallen for James Arthur Ray's self-help torture, let alone paid for it. Myth 3. Some of the people in that tent had been to Ray's extreme seminars before. Why come back? What do we as people get out of being tortured by a guru? We'll cover the events of the spirit warrior deaths in today's episode and put ourselves in the shoes of James Ray's followers to figure out what kept them in that burning air. Then next week in part 2, We'll talk about the life of James Arthur Ray himself. We'll discover why he doesn't see himself as a torturer, preying on the insecurities of the middle-aged. And Joe and I will look at the steps it would take for us to become extreme self-help gurus.
So our podcast isn't really journalism.
Yeah, but you've got some journalism credits for college from this.
Yeah, I've taken a couple of classes. So I just want to make that super clear in case somebody is listening to this and they're like, this is an old story. This happened years and years ago. Why are we listening to something about a case that happened and basically was solved? As a podcast, we're not uncovering new stories. We are trying to put ourselves in the shoes of, we are a history podcast effectively. So we're just trying to put ourselves in the shoes of seemingly inhuman actions. Because the most extreme stories we can find, those have components of the human element in them, and we can learn from it. The re-engineered you is about re-engineering ourselves. So when we talk about, we've had some really extreme stories on this podcast, but there's always a moment where we can look at it and be like, aha, here's how we would be in those shoes.
And in the brainstorming and our production meeting for this show, we were talking about walking that line between occult and self-help.
Right, exactly. That is ultimately the question we want to answer throughout the next 2 episodes is, when is it a cult? When is it self-help? Because they have very similar elements. And in fact, I remember in the news, the emergency medical responders who showed up to James Ray's sweat lodge, they thought it was a cult. They showed up in the desert and they're like, oh my God, we've just found the end of another Jamestown massacre. They thought that these people had killed themselves.
It was confusing. It looked like a mass suicide.
Right.
Now, I want to take you a little bit back on our James Ray here, our guru.
Please.
And I want to give you a little bit of his credibility. I'd followed him. I've read his books before all this happened. He was on the Oprah Winfrey Show, and Oprah gushed over him. He was in a movie called The Secret. Have you watched that movie?
I have not.
It is the biggest self-help movie. And what it's about, it's a nonfiction movie about the law of attraction.
Okay.
He was also on the Larry King Live, and he was on the Today Show. He was a New York Times bestselling author. Well, he still is a New York Times bestselling author. They can't take that away from you, Joe.
Okay.
So when you're a best-selling author on the New York Times for your fantasy writing, no matter how much stupid shit you do, how many people you bake in a sweat lodge, they can't take that away from you.
They can take the title away, but they can't take the physical money and the trophy as long as you hide it well enough.
James Ray was a very charismatic public speaker. He got so much press from that movie, The Secret, that he traveled all over the world giving these seminars where he made a ungodly amount of money. And then he did his workshop camps.
Right. Something that will come up a few times throughout this episode. If we know your face and name in pop culture, we assume you are successful. So, from what I can read from this, as soon as he got The Secret out, that's when he had a license to print his own money, basically.
Well, he had these $10,000 to $12,000 weeks where he would take, in your words, middle-aged, well-off, I would say upper class, maybe middle to upper, but definitely expendable income. They spend that kind of money to go to a sleep-deprived, fasting, walking on fire and glass, sweat lodge ceremonies. That's not really my idea of a CEO business seminar. Is it you?
No, that's no class I've ever been to.
Now, James Ray had been in trouble before. There have been some red flags through the years. And some of these you would think would ruin his reputation and he would be out of business. How many strikes do you think you get in this kind of business?
I would assume 1 because it's all reputation based.
Well, he had one very common activity, I guess we'll say he did. He used to take these middle-aged CEOs and do a karate thing where they would try to break boards and bricks with their hands.
Okay.
Well, one time, this New Jersey woman, she shattered her hand after multiple misses.
Oh, it only takes one before you're like, yeah, I'm not getting through this.
And this seminar was at Walt Disney World. Can you imagine your auntie going and smashing her hand on a brick, spending $12,000?
Mind over matter, auntie. No, that's wild.
He also did at his Spiritual Warrior 2006. He had everyone sign a waiver. He would take the tip of an arrow and put it up against the wall. So you have the bow and arrow with the arrow poking into the soft part of your neck.
Oh.
And he'd have people lean on it, put all their body weight into it. Kind of like that trust game where you stand behind somebody and they fall and you catch them.
Right.
But it ripped up this guy's whole face, this sharp arrow, and he was seriously injured.
So what is supposed to happen during that? Is it supposed to prove that, like, you're stronger than this arrow?
I think that's what a lot of it is. From the research, it looked like he was just doing things to just test you, to make you extremely, extremely uncomfortable.
Okay.
Kind of a stripping down effect.
Right.
So I want you to try to keep up to me on these incidents that happened. First, it was the broken hand at Walt Disney World. Then it was the arrow accident. Now they're getting more serious. We fast forward to 2009. There was a retreat, which cost $10,000, $12,000. The participants were told to pretend that they were homeless for a few hours. A lesson in self-sufficiency. So they stripped down all their clothes, got rid of their cell phones, their wallets, and everything. And a woman named Colleen Conaway jumped to her death.
Oh, okay. Any word on why that was part of the exercise?
There were a lot of follow-up questions, but the group was very hushed to the police. They didn't give them any information, and the family didn't get any information. All they know was one person saw her jump. They saw her climb up on top. Now, she was at a Horton Plaza mall in San Diego. So a very public place, and one person saw her fall. But she had no ID. She had no cell. I mean, if it was my mom, my sister, my friend, I would have some questions. I'm surprised this wasn't on Dateline or 48 Hours, some kind of investigation.
Right. If it was just one crazy person convinces another crazy person to jump, I can see that not landing in the news. But this is a huge self-help guru who has a huge reputation, and everybody in his circle is mum about somebody jumping off a building. That's wild.
So Colleen Conaway's family was absolutely heartbroken. So they reached out. They didn't get any answers of what happened or why it happened. She had paid $12,000 for the seminar, but she'd also, Joe, prepaid for 2 more. So the family, they were at least entitled to a refund on the 2 prepaid seminars. James Ray Group didn't send them a penny.
Oh, wow. That also, that answers a question I had in the back of my mind. If she's paid for multiple sessions, that tells me this wasn't like a suicide. Probably wasn't, right?
Right. She wouldn't have she would have packed everything up and gave that money to somebody else.
Right, exactly. So if I'm Lisbeth Newman and I'm about to go into a sweat lodge, you would think that would that would set off alarm bells, right? Like you're about to hand the keys to your life over to a guy who has wounded someone's eye with an arrow and been a part of somebody ostensibly leaping from a building, right?
Elizabeth Newman had attended a lot of these events. She was a very loyal follower of James Arthur Ray, and she believed in him. She had been embarrassed a few days earlier. She was chastised in front of the group of experienced volunteers because she shared snacks and a bottle of wine, which are supposed to be fasting. They're supposed to be dieting. And James Ray was always the motivational person. He said, now this is a quote, "There is a reason you will emerge a different person. You will face your own death. Life's never the same. It's just not." So he liked to push people right to that edge of life and death, flirting with death.
Okay.
And she had some social status in this group. This was a group of high income, and they were all seekers. And Lisbeth's, as a volunteer in this group, she was kind of a calming presence. She was always present, and she was a calming presence.
Okay, sort of like the social glue. So what happens when that social glue, that calming effect, goes unconscious in the tent? So, like, what happens when Lisbeth Newman isn't there to calm everybody?
She had reached her breaking point, and she was a strong-willed, tough woman. She had been through this before, in James Ray's own words. She had a tapping thing with her partner there to keep themselves conscious. But after she went out, everyone's hearts started to pound. They started projecting vomit. People were chasing each other out of the tent. They were dizzy. They were spinning around. They were running different ways. Some people collapsed. Some people were having convulsions. Joe, when law enforcement pulled up, they were like confused. They thought this was a mass suicide. They saw like a cult, people with their shaved head staggering around.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about the shaved heads. That is very cult-like.
They're sweating. They look like zombies. They're walking dead. And half of them that aren't passed out, who aren't unconscious, are screaming because they're on fire. Their organs, their skin is absolutely being cooked.
Okay. Good Lord. Well, as a teaser, I do want to follow James Ray out of the desert. Like, we do want to sort of like Manhunter style track where he goes. Are you okay with leaving that for our second episode, for part 2?
Yeah, it only gets better.
Okay.
It only gets weirder, believe it or not.
Okay. I mean, you would think that somebody who has clearly had, I mean, literally fatalities and injuries during his seminars before, a good leader with that kind of experience would have an emergency response team, and he would gather all his people around after the tent and like talk them through this tough time, right?
Well, you would think, save who he could and maybe explain this to the police. His closest entourage, his cronies, grabbed him and he skipped town like that.
Okay.
Years later, in a 2013 interview, he said he, quote, that he had fled the scene rather than staying to assist with the aftermath. Because, Joe, I was scared.
I mean, I would be scared. I hope he means scared of incarceration. Like, he's not talking about scared of his zombie followers coming back to haunt him, right?
He had all them under his finger. He wasn't too cooperative with authorities either, even by phone. He wasn't saying a word. So
we hopefully are going to do the impossible in part 2, which is put ourselves in his shoes. But first, I want to convince you, Todd, that we could be in that tent.
There's no way.
There's no way.
I am not as smart as you, but I guarantee I'm too smart to do that. And I know that you're way too smart to fall for this.
You'd never bully yourself. I think we would. And so when I started looking into the science of this, a lot of, let's say, politics have been in the news lately about how you convince people of untruths. It doesn't matter what political side you're on. You can get, or how intelligent you are. Let's just say that. You can be tricked. Not even tricked. You can be convinced to believe interesting things. And so I want to convince you that we could have been in that tent, even though these people from the outside look like brainwashed cultists.
I'd rather be a cult leader, but I don't want to do all this stuff and hurt people. I just want to have sex with them and get their money.
Right. We want Bentleys. We don't want bodies. Well, I'm going to go through a couple of studies. So the first thing I want to debunk, we talk about one of our myths is we would never be in that tent. All of these were educated people. They were affluent. They were successful. But I'm going to argue, just based on the studies that we're going to cover, it's because they're good at learning from authority figures that they have dunked on life as hard as they have. She was an administrator, like she was a network administrator, wasn't she?
She was. And don't spoil it for me, but she was a very grounded woman by all things we can measure.
That's what I'm getting from almost everybody we look into. We didn't just read about Lisbeth. We read up on a bunch of the victims of James Ray. All of them fit the Lisbeth profile. They worked in social groups. They learned from authority figures. They had good social skills. They were educated. They had college educations. We had an episode about college degrees. And in that episode, we covered how important, quote unquote, soft skills are, meaning you're good at working in a team and you're good at social networking and you're good at affecting change. I swear to God, when you read the dialogue between them, like what people said about what Lisbeth told her team in that tent and what Dennis, the guy that was like worked out the tapping system with her, they use these damn soft skills in the tent to comfort each other to try to finish the challenge. Like James Ray, to my understanding, what my interpretation of this, he used their like we have basically bred a generation of people who are good at soft skills, educated, good at following instructions. He used everything against them as far as getting them to go through this challenge. He got them to treat it like it was work, like it was a job. He put himself in a place of authority. He made them rely on each other to support each other through his ridiculous challenges. And he took people who wanted a challenge.
So people you think maybe who were simpler people wouldn't have fallen for this, that he used their backgrounds and their goals.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking is... Okay, so I've got a couple of friends who are not educated, who one of them works in road construction and the other one is a security guard. They would never fall for this. They would fall for different things. They would fall for a different grift. They would fall for a different kind of leader. But they wouldn't fall for this specifically because they don't like to listen to authority like this, and they don't have the mind to use these soft skills. They haven't been trained from the time they entered middle school to support each other socially while they face something tough. They do it like every man is an island. They didn't get that soft skill set from college. So I want to get into a study. These are fluency studies. And I want to test you and myself on this a little bit. This comes from The Guardian, and this is a article that came out years ago called Why Smart People Are More Likely to Believe Fake News. So I'm going to just start off with a quote from The Guardian, quote, "Misinformation is cleverly designed to bypass careful analytical reasoning." And when I first read that very first phrase, I'm like, okay, we're in James Ray territory. We're in the tent. So the idea is that smart people are vulnerable to certain ideas because their brain power, their speed of thought actually allows them to rationalize incorrect beliefs. The phrase they use in here, and this was a perfect test for me, and I'm going to ask you this question. How many animals did Moses take on the ark with him?
2 of each.
Okay. Now, people like us, let's just say less educated folk will say 2 of each.
Yeah, when I said simple earlier, I wasn't talking about other people. I was talking about us.
Right. Most people say 2 of each. Some people do the extra brain work and they try to figure out how many species there were, and they will summarize. They'll be like, 2 billion or whatever. And then super brain people will be like, oh, there are there's so many millions of types of insects around the world. So he would need 2 arcs. One arc will just hold insects. Another arc will hold only mammal. Like they'll get crazier and crazier with it. The real answer, and this is only about 12% of people answer this correctly, Moses didn't take an ark. It was Noah.
Oh,
so
I should have thought.
If it sounds like I am playing like a silly internet game with you, this is how James Ray grifts people, and I'll explain why. When a statement feels fluent, meaning it's easy for our brain to process the question, we roll with it. Our brain is designed to process things fast when it's possible. And so if I say, how many animals did Moses take on the ark? Your brain is fluent enough to be like, I get 90% of that question. We're just going to answer. Let's, we hit the buzzer. We hit the red button in front of us like it's a game show. We're like, I got that answer. Boop, boop. What really has to happen is we have to slow down and question, not the question itself, but the person asking us, because it's a trick. Like whoever is asking us this question is tricking us. When James Ray walks up to you and says, I have this wisdom from Bushido, and he starts quoting Bushido. He's like, the man who thinks himself who is dead, has nothing to fear. Or he misquotes Native American proverbs, or he talks about self-empowerment, or he uses his father's pastoral experience. His father was a preacher, and he uses that experience to misquote Bible quotes or things that are spiritual to you. Our brain does the same, math. How many animals did Moses take on the ark? Well, everything coming out of James Ray's mouth sounds like it is 90% correct. And so our brain maps it as fluent. We check most of the boxes on this makes sense. And then we just sort of answer. And the answer that most of his followers gave is, yes, I would like to be more self-actualized. I want that spiritualism.
And as educated as you are, you can't read everything.
Right. Actually, the better way to think of it is, as educated as you are, you can't question everything. You got to be educated by following the advice of authorities, by listening to professors, by listening to the librarian, by listening to spiritual leaders. You got to be that intelligent because you're good at taking authorities' advice.
So if I'm following this, so if I just heard a hint of something that I've read before, I'm not going to stop and try to digest the whole thing. I'm just going to go with, I got this, I read this, I know about this.
Right. I would actually hazard to make this statement, because there's no data behind it. I think if you questioned everything everyone told you, like if you went around your life and you constantly challenged everything an authority told you to run this test on them, the fluency test, you'd be dumber. Like you'd be a simpleton, because you would constantly question every professor who ever spoke to you, even though most of them are trying to educate you. This is also, I suspect, why self-help books invent totally new ways to combine empowering words. If you've ever cracked open a self-help book, and a lot of these gurus have their own lingo, they invent their own combination of ways to say it. Like I'll take a good book. I'll take The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. He has his own lingo. He has his own catchphrases. He has his own way of thinking. They invent ways to frame what they're saying, metaphors to get you into it. You have to have a scholarly skill set to understand that quickly. You have to have a college background almost, the fluency to be able to pick up on it fast and feel comfortable following along. One example of is the use of imagery. So like photographs help us visualize statements. And if you can visualize it, it seems truer. We can see this with like medical stories. People are more likely to believe pseudoscientific claims if it has like a visual of a brain scan next to it. So when you see a fake article about like, this just in the scientific community, Clorox bleach, drinking it cures COVID. If there is a visual picture of like a scan, that blue or black scan on television of somebody's like the inside of somebody's body, you're more likely to believe it just because your brain sees an image and it has fluency. It tracks that metaphor.
And it says 99.99%.
Right.
So there's even more science.
Right. Yeah, just that number there works. We're not going to get into how authority works in psychology, but the moment where Lisbeth passed out and somebody asked if she needed help, and the authority in the room, James, said, she's done this before, that screams of the Milgram experiment. If you ever want to look that up, that's a fantastic example of how authority tricks us into obeying even though somebody else is in peril. There's also a really good article that talks about the Milgram experiment, specifically with how this might be applied. There's a BBC Future article called Our Ability to Stand Up to Authority Comes Down to the Brain. It's a really good sort of easy to digest read of this. But just putting it in context of James Ray, this is a man who had proven that he can improve lives. I mean, the proof, and this goes for all gurus, Tony Robbins, Eckhart Tolle, Brene Brown, all these people who make a lifestyle of helping people improve. The proof, of course, is that other people in their orbit say how good they are. You don't go back and look at the woman who jumped from a building or the man who gouged out his own eye with an arrow or all these accidents that float around James Ray. You ask the people who are loudly standing next to him and shouting, "This man, improved my life. This man saved me." That makes him an authority far more than his sketchy record does.
And Tony Robbins is just better than anybody at the beginning of his career. He got like B-level celebrities, Pamela Anderson and stuff, to go on the infomercials. He would coach them for free. And then he'd go on there and tell the world, he changed my life. You need to buy his tapes.
Right. And we're kind of being a little bit glib about gurus and self-help and things like that. I just want to say, just from my own perspective, this is my note, based on the articles we've read, there's no shame in wanting to give your power to an authority. Because no matter how smart you are, you can always imagine finding someone who's smarter than you and has a better life plan than you. In fact, we do that on a financial level. Like, we go see financial planners. We go see spiritual leaders. We go seek out people who have a better plan than us, and that's what makes you smart. If you're listening to this podcast, you're looking for people who may have read an article or two that you haven't yet. It's not that we're smarter or we're better educated or that we have all the answers. It's just that we delved into something you might be interested in. So there's no shame in risking things and looking for somebody else who might have a blueprint to life. In fact, that's why I think these people were susceptible to this, because they had become financially secure, they had reached middle age, and they were at a time in their life where they would start looking for Maslow's hierarchy. How familiar are you with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the pyramid?
I've never heard of that.
Okay. Basically, it's a very popular system of thinking in self-help. Maslow's hierarchy of needs basically states that once you take care of your base needs, so food, water, shelter, you start looking for other things to improve, to complete your life as a human, basically.
Joe, is this kind of why when you make more money and all your needs are met, then you start looking for other problems that you didn't even know there to solve?
Right. Yes, as you money really just takes care of the bottom couple of needs. In the pyramid, we'll just go through it real quick. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. at the very base of it is stuff that our country is struggling with right now, which is physiological. Air, water, food, shelter, clothing, things like that. Above that, and money solves all of them, or at least a good, responsible, social, like network. I was going to say social, real just good safety nets in society do that for you. Safety needs come above that. So like personal security, employment, resources. And then we get into the needs that money doesn't fix. And this is where James Ray steps in. Above that, you have love and belonging and friendship and intimacy, family, connections. That's starting into James Ray territory because he promises all these. Most self-help gurus do. They're like, I can get you love. I can get you a sense of self, belonging, things like that. But where self-help gurus really excel and they really draw people in is esteem and self-actualization. Self-esteem, respect, status, recognition, strength. Those are things that once you have money and once you have a family, which Elizabeth had both those. She had a loving family life. Her children liked her. She had safety. She had her basic needs because she made good money. Her struggle started at self-esteem and self-actualization because the top of the pyramid is the desire to become the most that one can be, to realize what you are made of in life, what you can accomplish, what is at the core of your being. Gurus promise that. They promise, they make the heaviest promises near the top of that pyramid. And that's what draws in people who already have their basic money problem solved. Weak gurus say, I can make you rich and I can get you laid. Strong gurus, Tony Robbins, they tell you, I can help your self-esteem. I can make you find out who you are at the core of your being. That is a strong promise to make.
And this is like strong branding. We start talking about spirit warriors.
Yeah.
Right. That's carved for a certain kind of people. Like you said, it's not the get rich quick.
Yeah, spirit warriors. He's not saying cash warriors. Like there's a reason why he's got that brand. Just while I was doing this research, one of my friends was like, well, it sounds like James Ray is a master of EQ, emotional quotient. The whole craze about not IQ, but EQ is what wins the day and makes you smart emotionally, makes you successful at work. We're gonna have a link to an article. I just want to put it in there anecdotally. EQ makes you more likely to succeed in life. If you've ever read the book EQ, it's another self-help book. EQ makes you a better person across the board. However, it doesn't make you a good person. In this article, they point out that Martin Luther King Jr. was very emotionally intelligent. So was Adolf Hitler. Both of them knew what gestures to make toward an audience. They knew how to use gestures to their advantage. They knew how the emotions were being reflected by the audience. They knew how to project the right emotions, how to structure a speech so it hit emotional cores. So EQ does not grant you the status of good person. If somebody is, I guess the simple way to say it is, morality counts just as much when you apply EQ. In fact, what you come in with, if you learn if you raise your emotional quotient, whatever morality you come in with, that's probably what you're going to walk out with. So James Ray had emotional intelligence, but he was not using it for good. So that kind of busts one of the big myths about his followers being cult-like followers. If somebody is a cult follower, they have a level of desperation and need, and they're usually estranged from their family, or at least they can be. This was something I think Ray, if I'm remembering wrong, in an interview, he said that Elizabeth was estranged, and so were other members. Is there any truth to that?
There were a lot of rumors about his members being kind of in a desperate state, like you said, estranged from their family. But it turned out that Ray started about these rumors.
Oh, he claimed that.
Yeah. He had one woman named Kirby Brown, and Ray just made the claim that all of his files were broken, and he was, what all good gurus do, fixing them. And Ray said, this, and I'm quote this, "My greatest critic, who said her daughter Kirby was cooked, was actually estranged from her daughter. And that was one of the reasons the daughter was even there." Kirby Brown's sister was horrified by this statement and called it absolutely untrue. "Kirby was the maid of honor at my wedding at my parents' house 3 months before she died. She was out seeking something in life, but she was not estranged at all. This is horribly insulting misrepresentation of the truth."
So Ray's like, I am fixing birdies with broken wings, and everybody's refuting it. It's bullshit.
Yeah, and he's not even doing his research. You know, in a group of this many people, you could probably find a few.
Yeah, anyone who pays me $10,000 for self-help, I'm looking at your profile. Like, I'm reading up on you. It seems like he didn't even do that much.
Or especially one of his followers, his goons, that's his real inner circle, to stop the bleeding of this legality.
Okay, so if our main follow here, Elizabeth, if she wasn't a lost soul going into this tent, what was she like then? Like, what did her family life look like?
Well, and it's hard to measure mental health, right?
Yeah.
But on paper, okay, and this is in her own daughter's. This is Elizabeth Newman, the one we base the narrative on. Her daughter's words. She said she's a strong-willed woman. She met her ex-husband Randy. It was her high school sweetheart at Prior Lake High School, and that's the same high school where her 3 children went to and graduated. But she had a professional job. She had 3 kids. Doesn't that say security to you? How many people do you know the kids went to the same high school as the parents?
We are ticking off all of the base, everything going up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. She had the family, she had the money, she had everything.
Doesn't database administrator in an ID department at the Merrill Corporation, doesn't that sound pretty secure too?
Yeah, that does.
She was working. She was very healthy. She had a good nutrition program. She had an exercise program. And she was very into her own spirituality. She loved her dog. She loved to cook. She was part of the leadership team at the Spiritual Warrior thing. So she was experienced, which makes me show people who show up for things over and over are what? People we depend on, people we count on, people we look up to.
Can you imagine seeing this woman out jogging like early in the morning? Like, I could just imagine going outside my neighborhood and just waving at her as she ran by.
Now, one thing that was kind of strange was, and I think she kind of knew that something was off because she didn't share the information back with her daughters exactly what was happening. She would kind of take it from an R rating down to a PG or a G.
Okay.
So she really believed in Ray, and she was feeling like she was being enlightened. And she was also thinking that she was spiritually having a breakthrough.
Okay.
The only thing she ever mentioned to her daughters was the one thing about the broken hand. And that made the daughters kind of scratch their head like, okay, but because she didn't tell them about every single weird thing that happened, the shaving of the head, the fasting, the going without water, she didn't want to spook her daughters.
She kept the bitterest stuff to herself as far as Ray's bizarre behavior.
Her mother, Elizabeth Newman, had a 7-year relationship with the James Ray following the organization. And his daughter's research said this. His intent was to make money and control lives.
That was Ray's daughter that said that.
Mm-hmm.
Holy shit. Okay.
And I think the latter one is the big one here, Joe. He was already rich beyond most people's wildest dreams. He liked to have total control over people.
Wow. So to launch into our next myth, I want to pick up on something that you just said there that really rings to me, that makes me really want to sort of like bust our next myth. You mentioned that she kept things from her family about what Ray was doing. She didn't want to tell them the things that would freak them out because she felt like she was having a breakthrough spiritually. I want to talk about two things that I think would help people, smart people, fall for this kind of behavior. Because again, it hijacks a portion of the smart person's brain that will make them feel like they're having a breakthrough. When you watch TED Talks, and you're sitting there listening, and they're like revealing something big, as the person that runs TED Talks said, they share one major idea, and it's something that is mind blowing. They try to have one major aha reveal. When you hear that, what does it feel like to you, like in your life? Like, what are you gaining from hearing a good TED Talk?
I feel like I'm getting some kind of insider information that's going to help me do better and feel better and be better.
That is so perfect. Insider information. That's what I feel too. When I hear Brene Brown talking about being vulnerable, or when I hear, I'm using TED Talks as an example because Tony Robbins himself has a TED Talk. Almost all gurus will get into TED Talks at some point, and they will share something groundbreaking. And I think they get booked based on popularity. TED picks people out. We have read about opportunity hoarding. We did an episode on classism on this podcast, and it was about how the upper class, the reason why the upper class doesn't shrink, the reason why the upper class and the wealthiest classes in America, they don't get smaller, is because when they see people who can show reciprocity, eventually they share opportunities with each other. People in the upper class will say, "Oh, hey, your kid needs a good tutor. I have an excellent tutor who is a professor who's down on his luck, and he can tell your kid how to pass a chemistry final. You need a good SAT tutor for your kid. I've got that. You need a better doctor. I can help you. You need to invest in something good. I've got an investment opportunity for you. It's called Enron."
It's insider information that you're talking about here.
Yeah. So opportunity hoarding, it can be big. It can be stuff like you should invest in a housing development I'm investing in, or it can be small. It can be I stand in front of you and I tell you that if you're vulnerable with the people at work, you will be in a management position in the next year, like Brene Brown does. Good speakers, good TED Talks, good gurus, they feel like opportunity hoarding. They feel like they're taking you and giving you insider information, and they're educating you. Gurus do this. And by the way, if you're thinking that I'm overreaching, that I'm thinking that I use Brene Brown as an example because she's a professor. She sounds intelligent. She's sharing for this information. But her whole talk, when she has a very, very popular TED Talk about personal vulnerability, it starts with her talking about going to a psychologist. And if you don't think that in itself is an indicator of being in the upper class, consider that 56% of adults with mental illness cannot get treatment. They can't afford it.
$500 an hour.
Right. So we are starting that talk in the first 60 seconds with the knowledge that we are in the upper 44% of the economic class. And then it just goes from there. Like every guru or every TED Talk or every professor who speaks to you, they drop hints that they are in the upper class. And so when they share wisdom, it sounds like opportunity hoarding. I'm, of course, reading into this a bit, but it's really quite easy to like make that that comparison, because gurus, they use that even more than like TED Talks or professional speakers do. Gurus will project wealth. If you ever look at a guru or look up gurus like Tony Robbins, they dress in suits. They ride helicopters. They have pictures of them golfing, like hitting the keys. They have pictures of themselves with celebrities. It is their job to present authority, wealth, and success. That way, every time they talk to you, it sounds like they are opportunity hoarding, like they are sharing an upper class opportunity with you, and all you have to do is pay them a little bit of money, and they will share all of the opportunities that they have gained with you directly. And then we want to talk a little bit about why Lisbeth did not share the broken hand incident with her family. No, she shared that. She didn't share the arrow incident. She didn't talk about the woman who jumped to her death. She didn't talk about the close calls that people around James Ray had. The reason why, and really this gets into why I think gurus work and why they actually are peddling something very real. We're going to talk about the bitter pill effect. So let's pretend, Todd, you and I are in the Middle Ages. It's the Dark Ages, quote unquote, the Dark Ages. Peasants are going around in robes. People are literally shoveling shit to fertilize their crops. Somebody sneezes and everyone says, "God bless you," because they know that person is dead. like you sneeze, it's like, oh, they have the plague. They're going to go. You tell me that you have an ache in your back and you need me to solve it. And so what I give you is I hand you a tea. Like I'm an apothecary or I'm a doctor in the 15 or 1600s. I hand you a horrible smelling tea and you drink it. What would you think of my doctoring skills?
Not very good. You're not from Northwestern or anything,
right? When I sit in history classes, I've heard people laugh when people are like, "Yeah, doctors used to feed people, like the public. They used to feed them literal dried out feces, or urine, or gross teas, or like the more gross the treatment is, the more people cringe and they like, ooh, no, why would you drink that? Why would you eat that? Why would you take that pill?" We talk about like bloodletting, that was huge, that you would like, drain people to make them feel better. Was it George Washington was drained of blood over and over again while he was on his deathbed, and he's like, enough, just let me die. Okay, so the bitter pill effect is part of the placebo effect, and it works. We've have study after study that show that placebos work. They make you feel better. Your mind, the hormones you produce after getting a quote unquote a pill or a medical solution, it makes you feel better, and your body is actually capable of regenerative effects sometimes, depending on what the ailment is. But if you give somebody honey or something sweet or something delicious, and you say, "That's medicine, take it," it's not very memorable. Like I had a sweet pancake breakfast at IHOP this morning. I'm not thinking of that as medicine. That's just what I ate. It was delicious, but it wasn't medicine. But if you give me something that smells like roadkill and tastes like excrement, I'm gonna remember that.
Has to hurt to heal.
Exactly. It is not just memorable. I'll think about it forever. Have you ever been given smelling salts?
Oh, I have, yeah.
It's revolting. I will
smack in the face.
Yeah, I got smelling salts put under my nose at a football camp, and it gave me a headache. But that's the thing is that's now more than 20 years past, and I still remember it. If James Ray tells you get in the sweat lodge, and then he makes your life miserable, nearly to death, for the course of an hour, you'll never forget it. It will break up your monotonous daily routine better than Christmas does. You'll remember it for years to come. And when he promises people, you'll come near death, you're going to have an awful experience, but you will feel alive and rejuvenated. I actually believe him. I don't think he's lying about that part. I think that going through extreme experiences, it helps us break up the monotony, the sort of gray slurry our memory turns into over the years. It breaks it up like those smelling salts does.
And the joy of it being behind you and with these other people that you care very much what he thinks, and what your other cult member followers think.
Right. If you're in a plane crash together, you remember that for years, and survivors report more happiness after having survived an incident. That's just very simple psychology. So if you happen to survive a sweat lodge, if you can volunteer to get into a plane crash that you will supposedly live through, why not? Why not break up your monotonous life? Take that bitter pill. Somebody tells you it's going to cure you spiritually. Why wouldn't you believe them if you've done it before? If you've lived through something extreme, you know how happy you will be afterward.
And how much status do you lose if Joe Anthony's the one that taps out? Right.
Yeah. And if you're the strong one in the tent and you help me through that, we're bonded. Like after that, we're two educated, successful people, and now we've lived through this together. Who wouldn't want that experience? There's a study that the Scientific American reports on, and this is about the bitter pill effect. They report on a University of Essen, which is a German college. They do a test where 30 subjects who are allergic to dust, they take a pill for 5 days, and it's got a strange tasting drink. 11 subjects received the strange drink, but it has an inactive placebo. So it tastes weird, but it has an inactive inert substance. It's not going to do anything. It's just a shot of weird water. The other subjects just got plain water and an active drug or a placebo. So they would mix it up between the two. One's a control group. The subjects who got the strange drink that was a placebo had the same reaction and the same reduction in allergy symptoms as those who received the actual medicine. So those who drank water with the placebo, nothing happened. The people who took something bitter and strong that was supposed to be just water, they had the same reduction in allergies as the people who took actual medicine. That is so crazy to me, but bitter pill solutions work. Placebos actually do have an effect. And I think James Ray actually was giving people, before they died, a very memorable experience that did, in fact, change their life. And if you think maybe gurus are going to go away, if the phenomenon of the guru, if the era of the guru, like we've coined it in the opening, if that's going to go away, it's the reverse. After COVID, because of the lockdowns, China's demand for gurus and self-help is on an incredible boom right now. People who have been locked up inside for the last year are seeking self-help and gurus in record numbers. So this is not a phenomenon that's going away anytime soon.
Well, it feels like that. If enough of these get exposed, and it's been one after another, kind of like the mega pastors that do just terrible things.
Right.
Yeah.
So we are now at the phase where we are getting into we're taking the bitter pill with Lisbeth. If we're following the story along, we want to know what that spiritual retreat was like, and we want to know how bitter was the drink, in quotes. You mentioned that Ray played a samurai death god game where he freaked everybody out and shaved their heads and stuff. What did they go through? What did they get for their money, basically?
Well, it was limited seating, so you had to have $10,000 just to be there. And it was what Ray called the Sweat Lodge. And it was 5 days. It was a catalyst for personal transformation. Sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And it was located at the Angel Valley Spiritual Retreat, and that's a ranch near Sedona, Arizona. So hot out in the middle of the desert.
Hot and dry.
And it was called the Spiritual Warrior Program. and he had the participants shave their heads and spend 36 hours in the desert meditating. No water, no food. He'd have them watch, before they go out in the desert, The Last Samurai.
The Tom Cruise movie.
The corny Tom Cruise movie.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
How believable is he as a samurai warrior?
Yeah.
Like Burt Reynolds being a samurai warrior. Give me a break.
I don't think history will look super fondly on a white guy being the last samurai and saving another culture.
Now, this is the weirdest one. They would play a game where Ray would dress up in a white robe and declare himself as God.
By robe, we do mean like a kimono. So he's like coming out in a Japanese kimono, or I don't know if it's a kimono or what they call it, but it's in movies when you see samurai and they're wearing like the robe. He's pretending to be a death god, right?
Exactly. And he'd point at you and say, "Joe Anthony, you're dead." So you'd have to lay motionless on the ground.
That is a sucky game of tag.
Remember when we were kids, we do that stupid thing?
Yeah.
So why would these people pay 10 grand let this guy strut around? You're dead. I know he'd be too smart for this. He was getting total control and total power over these people between the fasting and the brainwashing and the looking up at him. Now, Elizabeth Newman, when she'd come back from these retreats, because remember, she'd been doing this for 7 years when she'd get her vacations from work. This is how she'd spend her vacations. So when she went home to her daughters, they noticed that she was alive. She was full of life. Kind of like you said, she was actually better.
I can imagine. Like she basically had volunteered to be in a car crash and knowing she would walk away from it. So I would come back electric.
And she'd come back and she'd talk about the hikes, the camaraderie. She wouldn't talk about any of the negative things. The only negative thing she ever talked about was the broken hand in the martial arts display.
Right.
Now, this is the heartbreaking part of the story. The daughters saw on the news something had happened, and there weren't any names released. They didn't know what happened. Nobody from the Sedona Lounge, the Sweat Lounge, had contacted them. Anytime you go to even Boy Scout camp, they have what? An emergency contact, right?
Right. Somebody calls you and they say, "Is this the parent of Todd Lemense? Your kid is sick."
So you're watching the news. You see 4 people are dead and 3 people are dead. You're wondering, is one of those my mom? So they got on the phone. They started making phone calls. So the first responders, the paramedics, the firefighters, they didn't have any IDs. They didn't have any paperwork on these people. So their mom, Elizabeth Newman, was a Jane Doe at the hospital. Nobody was able to identify her.
Holy shit. She paid $10,000 to become a Jane Doe in a lodge.
So the daughter gets on, her and her husband hop on a flight to Arizona. They get there to the visitation at the hospital. And at this point, she's on life support. She's in a coma. And with her daughter there, Elizabeth Newman died. Do you remember before we were talking about the people came out of the tent and their organs were cooked?
Right, their skin had turned purple. Like they washed them off, and it was like under the dust they were purple.
Liz Newman died of that. She died of multiple organ failure.
Damn.
The things that make us good at modern life: listening to successful people, taking good advice, educating ourselves, seeking self-actualization. These are all positive pursuits. Pursuits which, ironically, make us more vulnerable to the gravity of the guru. Gurus who would ask you to walk over hot coals or sit in a boiling tent in the name of education or self-actualization. Do you know why we fall for people like James Ray? It's not because his followers are gullible or vulnerable, or because they're estranged from their families like cult members. Liz Newman wasn't any of those things. She was successful and strong by anyone's measure. We fall for hucksters like James Ray Because if we're doing life right, we never stop searching for the truth. Nor should we. And gurus blend the truth they're offering with two very tempting nuggets: upper class opportunity and the appearance of progress. You walk away after taking their bitter pill, feeling the strongest placebo effect possible. That's also partially why the middle-aged are susceptible to gurus too. If you've dunked on life hard enough to take care of your basic needs, food, water, shelter, and family, then your next stop should naturally be a wise man, a spiritual awakening, something bigger than another college course or tax seminar. Something about finding the real you, the you that's been powering your motor from the start. You'll be looking for self-actualization. You'll be looking for James Ray, unfortunately. And why shouldn't you? Just be cautious. Because the distance from a yoga studio to a sweat lodge is shorter than you'd think. You've been listening to The Re-Engineered You. Thank you so much for listening to the show. You mean the world to us. We have a new episode every week.
Next week, we're going to find out what makes a good guru and what makes a bad guru, because they're not all James Ray. Spoiler, the genuine article is affordable, and they can also help achieve your goals, whereas the fake will just take your money and boil you. So connect with us at www.re-engineeredyou.com, where we have research links, show notes, and blog articles for each of our episodes. We also appreciate feedback, and we love spirited debate.
We're not experts in anything, but we've got an opinion on everything.